The war had been raging for 7 years, 3 months, and 16 days when Captain Marcus Reeves first set foot on Meridian Point, the neutral station that hung in space like a metal gravestone marking where hope went to die. The station rotated slowly between human and Varan space, in a sector so devastated by battle that stellar navigation charts simply marked it as disputed, rather than try to track which debris belonged to which destroyed fleet. Marcus stood with the rest of the human delegation in Docking Bay 7, his dress uniform feeling like it was made of sandpaper and bad decisions. To his left, Admiral Chen maintained the kind of rigid posture that suggested someone had replaced his spine with a titanium rod. To his right, Ambassador Williams clutched a tablet containing 17 different versions of a peace treaty, each one more desperate than the last. "Remember," Williams whispered to the military contingent, "we're here to end this war. Whatever it takes." "Within reason," Admiral Chen added, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure what reason meant anymore when humanity had lost 40% of its colonies. The Varan delegation's arrival was announced by a change in the station's atmosphere, literally. Their ships didn't dock so much as merge with the station's hull, the biomechanical vessels flowing into the docking ports like liquid metal learning to be solid. Marcus had seen Varan technology in battle, but watching it up close without trying to blow it up was differently unsettling. Then she entered, and Marcus understood why every human who'd faced the Varan Queen in battle had come back changed, if they came back at all. Queen Zareth moved like gravity was a personal suggestion rather than a universal law. 7 feet of lethal grace wrapped in bioarmor that shifted between solid and liquid states, her obsidian skin seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her 4 arms moved independently, each one signing different diplomatic gestures: respect, caution, evaluation, and something Marcus couldn't translate. But it was her eyes that made everyone step back unconsciously. Crimson fires that burned with an intelligence so vast it made you feel like a particularly slow child trying to explain quantum physics to itself. "Admiral Chen," she said, and her voice was a symphony of harmonics that the translators struggled to process. "Ambassador Williams, we meet to discuss the cessation of hostilities." The formalities began with all the enthusiasm of a funeral where nobody liked the deceased. Terms were presented, rejected, modified, re-rejected. Marcus stood at attention, trying not to think about Kepler 442b, about the mission that had gone sideways, about the enemy pilot he'd found in burning wreckage with her bioarmor failing and her breathing labored. He'd made a choice that day, one he'd never reported, one that had haunted him ever since. The Queen stopped mid-sentence during a discussion about mining rights in the Epsilon sector. Her primary eyes focused on Marcus, while her secondary eyes maintained contact with the negotiators, a disturbing display of divided attention that made his skin crawl. "You," she said, and the word cut through the negotiations like a plasma blade through tissue paper. Marcus's throat went dry. "Your Majesty." "Kepler 442b, 3rd rotation, 17th cycle. You pulled me from my fighter." The silence that followed could have been bottled and sold as concentrated awkwardness. Admiral Chen turned to stare at Marcus with an expression that suggested several court-martials happening simultaneously in his head. Ambassador Williams dropped his tablet, the clatter echoing in the sudden quiet. Marcus began, then stopped. What was the point of denying it? You were injured. It was the right thing to do. "The right thing," she repeated, tasting the words. "You saved your enemy's life, risked your own extraction, violated 16 protocols, and never reported it. Why?" "Because you were bleeding the same color blood I was," Marcus said simply. The Queen rose to her full height, and several humans unconsciously reached for weapons they weren't carrying. Her 4 arms spread in a gesture that could have been threatening or welcoming or both. "I will sign your treaty," she announced, and Williams actually gasped. "On one condition. This soldier becomes my consort. He will marry me according to both our traditions, live among my people, and serve as a bridge between our species. Her primary eyes never left Marcus. Refuse, and we resume orbital bombardment of your colonies within the hour. You have 12 hours to decide. That's insane. Admiral Chen exploded before diplomacy could muzzle him. You can't just. I am Zareth, Queen of the Varan Dominion, holder of the Quantum Crown, speaker of the Hive Song. I can do whatever I deem necessary for my people's survival. She moved toward the exit, her entourage flowing around her like water. 12 hours, Captain Reeves. Choose wisely. As the Varan departed, leaving behind air that tasted of ozone and impossibility, Marcus stood frozen while his entire world rearranged itself around the axis of an impossible choice. Captain, Admiral Chen said slowly, "What the hell did you do?" "Apparently," Marcus replied, his voice hollow, "I proposed without knowing it." The briefing room on the human section of Meridian Point had become a pressure cooker of panic, determination, and the kind of dark humor that emerges when people realize they're comprehensively screwed. Marcus sat at the center of what felt like an interrogation, surrounded by enough brass to start their own orchestra and several xenobiology experts who looked like they'd rather be studying anything else. "Let me get this straight," Rivera said, having somehow talked her way into the briefing despite her sergeant rank. "The Space Queen wants to marry you because you saved her life, and if you say no, we all die." "That's a bit reductive," Dr. Sarah Kim interjected, pulling up holographic displays of Varan biology. "The Varan don't view marriage the way we do. It's a biological imperative, a quantum entanglement of consciousness, and a political tool all rolled into one." "Romantic," Thompson muttered from where he leaned against the wall. "Do they at least have bachelor parties?" "Focus," Admiral Chen snapped, though stress had turned his voice into something between a growl and a plea. "Captain Reeves, I need to know exactly what happened at Kepler 442b. Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling a headache that had started 7 years ago finally reaching its crescendo. "My extraction shuttle was damaged. I set down near what I thought was debris, but it was a Varan fighter mostly intact but on fire. I could hear someone inside. He paused, remembering. "I didn't think, I just acted. Cut through the biohull with a plasma torch, pulled the pilot out. She was unconscious, her armor was failing. I got her to stable ground, made sure she was breathing, then left when I heard Varan search teams approaching." "You saved the Queen's life and didn't think to mention it." Chen's eye twitched in a way that suggested an aneurysm was being considered as a career option. "I didn't know it was her. She looked like any other Varan pilot. It wasn't until later, when I saw propaganda footage, that I recognized the bioarmor pattern." Dr. Kim cleared her throat. "We need to discuss what consort marriage actually means for a human." She pulled up more displays, these showing DNA strands and chemical structures that looked like someone had asked a spider on stimulants to design molecules. The Varan reproduce through a combination of genetic material and quantum consciousness transfer. The Queen's consort would undergo biochemical bonding that will alter your DNA at a fundamental level. "Alter how?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "Best case scenario. You develop some Varan characteristics, enhanced strength, possibly limited hive mind connectivity, ability to interface with their technology. Worst case. Your body rejects the changes, and you die in agony." "So, typical Tuesday in the military," Nakamura said, earning a glare from Chen. "There's more," Kim continued, looking uncomfortable. "Varan queens traditionally terminate their consorts after successful reproduction. It's considered an honor in their culture." "An honor," Marcus repeated flatly. "Being murdered by my wife is an honor." "To be fair," Williams said, having recovered his tablet and his composure, "divorce rates in human marriages aren't great either." "Not helping," Chen growled. A communication alert interrupted them. The screen flickered to life, showing Queen Zareth in what appeared to be her personal chambers. The walls behind her moved like living tissue, and Marcus tried not to think about what that meant. "Captain Reeves," she said, and even through the transmission, her voice made everyone shiver. "I am transmitting additional information for your consideration." The screen split, showing security footage from Kepler 442b. Marcus watched himself cutting through the biohull, pulling out the injured pilot, checking her vitals with shaking hands. But then the footage continued, showing something he didn't know had been recorded. After he left, Zareth had regained consciousness. She'd watched him retreat to his damaged shuttle, had her forces hold back when they could have easily captured him. "You spared me when killing me would have been easier," she said. "I spared you when capturing you would have been advantageous. We have been dancing around each other for 3 years, Captain, though only I knew it." "Why me?" Marcus asked, ignoring protocol. "You could demand anyone." "Because when you found me, you didn't see the Queen of the Varan. You didn't see an enemy to be ransomed or a prisoner to be taken. You saw someone who needed help." Her primary eyes focused on the camera, while her secondary eyes seemed to be reading something off-screen. "My people have forgotten that others can be anything but resources or threats. Perhaps a human consort can remind us." The transmission ended, leaving them in silence until Rivera said what everyone was thinking. "Well, Marcus, looks like you've got a date to get ready for." The wedding preparations were, to put it mildly, completely insane. Two species that had spent 7 years trying to exterminate each other now had to figure out how to combine their marriage traditions into something that wouldn't cause an immediate diplomatic incident or, worse, look tacky on the universe-wide broadcast. Marcus stood in what the diplomatic corps generously called a preparation chamber, but which looked more like a medical bay, had an aggressive negotiation with a fashion studio. Dr. Kim was running final medical checks, while a team of human and Varan tailors argued about his wedding attire through 3 different translation matrices. "The biometal must be attuned to his nervous system," insisted V-Rex, the Queen's personal stylist, whose 6 eyes were examining Marcus like he was a particularly challenging equation. "If you put any more alien tech on him, he'll look like he's being eaten by a very formal parasite," countered Ms. Chen, the human fashion coordinator who'd been flown in specifically for this impossible task. Marcus stood still, arms spread, wearing a hybrid uniform that seemed to shift between liquid and solid depending on the lighting. His dress whites had been integrated with Varan biometal that moved like mercury but felt like silk. It was simultaneously the most comfortable and most disturbing thing he'd ever worn. "How do I look?" he asked Rivera, who'd appointed herself as his unofficial best woman/bodyguard/comic relief. "Like a recruiting poster for a military that doesn't exist yet," she replied. "Very progressive. Very hello, I'm here to either save or doom humanity, depending on how this goes." Thompson and Nakamura entered, carrying a box that hummed ominously. "Wedding gift from the Queen," Thompson announced. "Fair warning, it's scanned as both organic and mechanical, and the radiation signature suggests it might be partially exists in another dimension." "Of course it does," Marcus muttered, opening the box. Inside was a weapon, or possibly jewelry, or maybe both, that looked like crystallized starlight had been convinced to become solid. It attached to his wrist, spreading tiny filaments that merged with the biometal of his uniform. "Translation Matrix says it's called a Unity Blade," Nakamura read from his tablet. "Traditional gift from Varan queens to their consorts. It's both a weapon and a biological compatibility enhancer." "That sounds ominous," Rivera noted. Dr. Kim scanned it with everything she had. "It's already synchronizing with your nervous system. Marcus, how do you feel?" "Like I'm wearing an alien mood ring that could kill me," he replied, watching the device pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. The door chimed and Ambassador Williams entered looking harried. "The ceremony starts in 1 hour. The Queen has made some unusual requests." "More unusual than marrying a human to prevent genocide?" Marcus asked. "She wants the ceremony to include combat." I'm sorry, what? Apparently, Varan marriage ceremonies traditionally include the couple fighting side by side against a symbolic threat. She's modified it for human sensibilities. You'll be fighting holograms, not actual enemies. Think of it as aggressive couples counseling. Every part of this gets worse, Marcus said, though he found himself oddly curious about what fighting alongside Zareth would be like without trying to kill each other. The ceremony venue was the station's great hall, hastily reconfigured to accommodate both species' needs. The human side looked like a traditional military wedding setup, all clean lines and formal dignity. The Varan side appeared to exist in several dimensions simultaneously, with geometry that hurt to look at directly. The center, where the actual ceremony would take place, was a compromise that somehow worked, a circular platform that rotated slowly, allowing the light to shift between human visible spectrum and the extended range the Varan could see. Marcus entered from the human side, his modified uniform drawing gasps from both species. The Unity blade had extended slightly, creating patterns of light along his arm that matched the biometal's flow. He looked, as one broadcaster would later describe, like humanity's answer to the question nobody asked. Then Zareth entered, and every other thought evaporated from Marcus's mind. She wore something that transcended the concept of clothing. It might have been a dress, or armor, or possibly a controlled stellar phenomenon that had agreed to pretend to be fabric. It shifted through colors that human eyes couldn't quite process, creating the effect of wearing a piece of space-time that had been convinced to be fashionable. Her forearms were decorated with quantum crystals that sang at frequencies only some species could hear. They met at the center platform, and for a moment the war didn't exist. There was just a human soldier and an alien queen, both wondering how they'd ended up here. "You came," she said, her voice softer than he'd heard before. "Did I have a choice?" he asked, but there was no bitterness in it. There's always a choice. You could have run, defected, claimed asylum with the Neutral Alliance, and let billions die for my cowardice. Her primary eyes studied him, while her secondary eyes seemed to be looking at something beyond the visible. Most would call it self-preservation, not cowardice. "I'm not most people." "No," she agreed, and there might have been warmth in her voice. "You're not." The ceremony began with Admiral Chen and Varan High Counselor Tehek reading statements about unity, peace, and the hope that this union represented. Marcus barely heard any of it, too focused on the fact that he was about to undergo something called biochemical bonding, with someone he tried to kill in battle at least a dozen times. Then came the combat demonstration, and everything changed. The holographic enemies materialized around them, representations of both human and Varan forces, a not-so-subtle reminder of what they were trying to prevent. Marcus had expected awkwardness, maybe some stumbling as they figured out how to fight together instead of against each other. He hadn't expected perfection. The moment the first hologram attacked, they moved in sync. Zareth's four arms created a defensive perimeter while Marcus struck at openings she created, the Unity blade extending into an energy weapon that responded to his thoughts. She would gesture, and he'd somehow know to dodge left. He'd attack, and she'd already be covering his blind spot. "How are we doing this?" he asked, ducking under a holographic plasma blast while she eliminated the source with casual precision. "The Unity blade creates a temporary neural link," she explained, using two arms to fight while the other two guided him through a complex maneuver. "You're thinking with part of my consciousness and I with yours." "That's incredibly invasive." "That's marriage," she replied, and he could feel her amusement through the link. They cleared the simulation in half the expected time, ending back-to-back, breathing hard but victorious. The audience, both human and Varan, erupted in applause that sounded like a storm had learned to show appreciation. The biochemical bonding came next. Dr. Kim and her Varan counterpart, a being that looked like what would happen if a praying mantis became a doctor, and then decided to be terrifying about it, approached with a device that looked medical in the way that torture implements look medical. "This will alter you at a genetic level," Dr. Kim whispered. "Last chance to back out. And restart the war. I think I'll pass." The device activated, and Marcus felt like someone had replaced his blood with liquid starlight. He could sense Zareth experiencing the same thing, their consciousness briefly merging completely. He saw through her memories, the weight of billions of lives, the desperate need to save her dying species, and underneath it all, a loneliness that matched his own. She saw through the brothers in arms he'd lost, the colonies burned, and the moment on Kepler 442b when he'd chosen mercy over vengeance. When it ended, they were both changed. Marcus could feel the hive mind at the edges of his consciousness, like a whisper in a language he almost understood. Zareth's eyes had gained golden flecks that looked suspiciously human. "By the authority vested in me by both humanity and the Varan Dominion," Admiral Chen said, looking like he was pronouncing his own death sentence, "I pronounce you married. May whatever deity is paying attention have mercy on us all." The kiss was awkward. Varan didn't traditionally kiss, and Zareth had teeth in places Marcus didn't expect. But somehow it worked, a perfect metaphor for what they were trying to build. As they parted, Zareth whispered something only Marcus could hear through their new bond. "The war was ending us both. Maybe peace will save us. Or kill us in new and interesting ways," Marcus replied, surprised to feel her laugh resonating through their connection. The reception was held in the station's observation deck, with Earth and the Varan homeworld both visible in the distance, two blue jewels separated by the void and 7 years of bloodshed. Humans and Varan mingled awkwardly, like teenagers at a dance where nobody knew the music. Marcus found himself in the surreal position of making small talk with beings who'd been trying to kill him last week. V-Rex, the stylist, turned out to have a devastating sense of humor once you got past the 6 eyes. T-Heck, the High Counselor, had an unfortunate addiction to human coffee that made him vibrate at concerning frequencies. "So," Rivera said, appearing at his elbow with 2 drinks, one of which was glowing, "how's married life?" "I can feel her emotions at the edge of my mind," Marcus admitted, taking the non-glowing drink. "She's currently finding the human ambassador's attempts at Varan dancing hilarious, but is too polite to laugh. That's either romantic or creepy." "Both, definitely both." Zareth approached, having shed the formal ceremony attire for something more practical but still impossibly elegant. "Your squad mates wish to know if I intend to eat you after mating," she said conversationally. "And?" Marcus asked, playing along. "I told them I haven't decided yet. It depends on how the honeymoon goes." Rivera choked on her drink. "She makes jokes, the murder queen makes jokes." "I make many things," Zareth replied. "Jokes, war, peace, and now apparently history." The celebration was interrupted by an emergency alert. Both human and Varan military personnel snapped to attention as reports came in of ships massing at the border. But these weren't military vessels preparing for war. They were civilian ships from both species, gathering to witness what everyone was calling the impossible marriage. "They're celebrating," Williams said, disbelief coloring his voice. "On 17 worlds, both human and Varan, people are celebrating." Marcus and Zareth stood together at the observation window, watching the ships form honor formations, their lights creating patterns in the darkness. "We actually did it," Marcus said quietly. "We began it," Zareth corrected. "Now comes the difficult part. The honeymoon." "The survival," she said, but took his hand, one of hers in his, while her other 3 arms gestured at the stars. "But at least we'll face it together." 6 months into their unprecedented marriage, Marcus and Zareth have transformed from reluctant partners to something neither species has a word for. The biochemical bonding has evolved beyond anyone's predictions. Marcus can now interface directly with Varan technology, seeing the quantum probability streams they navigate, while Zareth has developed what her advisors call concerning human tendencies like sarcasm and an addiction to pizza. They've established their base on New Harmony, the first joint colony, where the architecture hurts to look at because it exists in both human and Varan dimensional preferences simultaneously. The real test comes when extremist factions from both species, Admiral Rekart's Human Purity Coalition and Hive Lord Vexara's Varan traditionalists, form an unlikely alliance to destroy the marriage. They believe the hybrid union will contaminate both species' genetic purity. The attack comes during the colony's first Unification Day celebration, when both species are attempting to learn each other's cultural dances, which goes about as well as expected when one species has 4 arms and the other can't see in 7 dimensions. Marcus and Zareth must fight together, their neural link now so strong they can share tactical thoughts in real time. In the battle's climax, when a quantum bomb threatens to erase the colony from all possible timelines, they achieve something unprecedented, a full consciousness merge. For 30 seconds, they become neither human nor Varan but something entirely new, able to perceive solutions neither species could imagine. They disarm the bomb by thinking at it until it gets confused and decides not to exist. The victory celebration is interrupted when Dr. Kim and V-Rex announce their medical findings. Zareth is pregnant with something impossible, a true hybrid. The child shouldn't exist according to all known science, but quantum biology apparently didn't get the memo. As news spreads across both civilizations, the war officially ends not with a treaty but with a birth announcement. The story concludes 3 years later, with their daughter, Arya, playing in the garden of New Harmony. She has her mother's 4 arms but her father's eyes, can see in 12 dimensions but prefers human cartoons, and speaks both languages but invents her own words when neither species has the right term. Marcus and Zareth watch her chase a pet that exists in 3 dimensions simultaneously, and Marcus remarks, "Remember when our biggest problem was preventing genocide?" Zareth laughs, a sound that still makes nearby humans nervous, but that Marcus finds beautiful. Now our biggest problem is explaining to her why she can't have a pet black hole for her 4th birthday. The final scene shows them standing together as more mixed families arrive at the colony, human Varan couples who found love in the peace their marriage created, preparing for a future that no one could have imagined when a soldier chose mercy and a queen chose hope. 6 months after a wedding that stopped a war, Marcus Reeves stood in the command center of New Harmony, trying to explain to his 4-armed wife why humans found it disturbing when buildings screamed. "It's not screaming," Zareth corrected, her secondary arms typing at a console while her primary arms gestured at the bioarchitectural display. "It's expressing structural satisfaction. The building is happy." "Happy buildings don't help humans sleep," Marcus replied, pulling up his own data. "We've had 17 insomnia complaints this week, and Rivera threatened to challenge the medical center to single combat if it didn't stop yelling about its feelings. Your species' inability to appreciate architectural emotions is not the building's fault. Your species' insistence on making everything alive is not helping integration." They glared at each other for a moment before simultaneously breaking into laughter, a sound that had become common in the colony but still made their respective advisors nervous. New Harmony was, to put it mildly, an exercise in controlled chaos. The colony existed partially in human 3-dimensional space and partially in the 7 dimensions the Varan preferred, creating an effect that looked like MC. Escher had collaborated with H.P. Lovecraft on city planning. Streets would be perfectly normal until you turned a corner and found yourself walking on what had been a wall 30 seconds ago. The marketplace sold fruit that existed in the future and vegetables that remembered being different vegetables. "The hybrid crops are thriving," Dr. Kim announced, entering the command center with her now permanent expression of exhausted amazement. "The tomatoes that exist in quantum superposition until observed are particularly popular, though we've had complaints about potatoes that remember being French fries." "Nostalgic vegetables," Marcus muttered. Add it to the list of things I never thought I'd deal with. The integration hadn't been smooth, but it had been surprisingly successful. Humans and Varan lived side by side, learning each other's languages, customs, and increasingly falling in love. Marcus had officiated 3 human-Varan weddings in the past month, each one less universe-threatening than his own had been. "Alert from the perimeter," announced Lieutenant Cooper, one of the few humans who'd successfully learned to read Varan probability screens. "We've got ships incoming. Configuration suggests, oh hell." Marcus felt Zareth's alarm through their bond before she spoke. "How many?" 40 vessels, mix of human and Varan design. They're broadcasting on the old war frequencies. The screens lit up with the image of Admiral Reckart, a human whose face looked like it had been carved from granite and disappointment. Beside him stood Hive Lord Vexara, a Varan whose 6 arms moved in patterns that conveyed disgust in 12 different languages. "Attention, abominations," Reckart began, which Marcus thought was a bit rich coming from a man who'd had his empathy surgically removed to be a better soldier. "Your pollution of our species ends today. The purity of the Varan will not be corrupted by this unnatural union," Vexara added, her harmonics suggesting violence in frequencies that made everyone's teeth hurt. "They're working together," Zareth said, disbelief coloring her tone. "Extremists from both species found common ground in hating us. That's almost impressive." "Should we be flattered?" Marcus asked, already pulling up tactical displays. "We should be worried. Reckart has quantum bombs and Vexara knows how to use them." The colony's alarms began their song, a harmonious blend of human sirens and Varan bio-warnings that sounded like an orchestra having a nervous breakdown. Civilians rushed to shelters that existed in folded spacetime, theoretically safe from any weapon that obeyed the laws of physics. "All military personnel to defense positions," Marcus commanded, his neural implant broadcasting to both human and Varan troops simultaneously. It still felt weird, thinking in 2 species languages at once. Rivera arrived at a run, somehow already in full combat gear. "Sir, the extremists are jamming our long-range communications. We can't call for reinforcements." "Of course they are," Marcus sighed. "How's our defense grid?" "The human sections are operational. The Varan sections are having an existential crisis about whether violence for defense still counts as violence." "I hate philosophical defense systems," Zareth muttered, her 4 hands working at different control panels simultaneously. "V-Rex, convince the defense grid that protecting life is the highest form of peace." "Already trying, my queen," V-Rex replied through comms. "But it's being very stubborn about its pacifist phase." The first attack came not as weapons fire, but as a transmission that tried to rewrite reality. The extremists had developed a virus that targeted the biochemical bonds between human-Varan couples, attempting to sever the connections that made their cooperation possible. Marcus felt it hit like a sledgehammer to his consciousness, trying to tear Zareth's presence from his mind. Around them, other mixed couples cried out as their bonds came under attack. "Shields!" Zareth commanded, and the colony's hybrid defenses activated part human technology, part Varan bioengineering, entirely impossible by either species' science alone. "They're trying to isolate us," Marcus realized. "Make us fight as separate species instead of together." "Then we disappoint them," Zareth said, taking his hand with one of hers. "Full neural merge." "That's dangerous. Last time we only held it for 30 seconds. Last time we weren't fighting for our family's future." The word family sent a shock through Marcus. They hadn't told anyone yet, but the medical scans had confirmed it that morning. Zareth was carrying something unprecedented, a child that shouldn't exist but did anyway. "Together then," Marcus agreed. They joined not just hands but minds, their consciousness flowing together like rivers that had always been meant to be one ocean. The world exploded into impossible clarity. Marcus could see the quantum streams the Varan navigated, while Zareth experienced the linear time progression that humans used for tactical planning. Through their merged perception, the enemy's attack patterns became obvious, predictable, almost pitiful. They coordinated the colony's defense with thought speed, human and Varan forces moving in perfect synchronization. "Quantum bomb detected," someone shouted, but Marcus/Zareth had already seen it. A weapon designed to erase targets from all possible timelines, removing them from existence so thoroughly that they never would have existed at all. "Ideas," the part of them that was Marcus asked. "One," the part that was Zareth replied, "but it's insane. Our marriage was insane. This is just Tuesday." They reached out through the colony's hybrid systems, touching every human Varan pair's consciousness, creating a network of merged minds that spanned species. Together, they did something that neither science nor philosophy had words for. They convinced the quantum bomb that it didn't want to exist. The weapon, confronted by a collective consciousness that operated outside its parameters, suffered what could only be described as an existential crisis. It spent several seconds trying to figure out whether it existed, had existed, or would exist, before giving up and dispersing into probability foam. "Did we just defeat a weapon by confusing it to death?" Rivera asked over comms, sounding genuinely impressed. "Technically, we defeated it by existing at it aggressively," Marcus replied as he and Zareth carefully separated their consciousness, both shaking from the strain. The extremist fleet, faced with defenses they couldn't comprehend and weapons that kept having philosophical crises, retreated in disorder. Rekart's final transmission was just sputtering rage, while Vexara's harmonics suggested she was reconsidering several life choices. As the immediate danger passed, Dr. Kim and V-Rex approached with medical scanners, fussing over both of them. "You held the merge for 3 minutes, Kim said, awe and concern mixing in her voice. "That should have killed you both." "We had motivation," Zareth said, her primary hand moving to rest on her abdomen in a gesture that was universally maternal. V-Rex's 6 eyes widened as his scanner picked up what she meant. "My queen, you're—" "Impossible," Marcus finished. "We're impossible. Our child is impossible. This whole colony is impossible. Might as well lean into it." The announcement of the pregnancy spread through the colony faster than light through a vacuum, because gossip apparently violated several laws of physics. The celebration that night was legendary. Humans teaching Varan beer pong, while Varan introduced humans to a game that involved throwing objects that existed yesterday at targets that might exist tomorrow. 3 years later, Marcus stood in the Garden of New Harmony, watching his daughter Arya chase Mr. Squiggles, a pet that existed in 3 dimensions simultaneously, and had the unfortunate habit of leaving its middle dimension in inconvenient places. "Daddy," Arya called, her 4 arms reaching up for him. "Mr. Squiggles is being tomorrow again. Tell him to be now, sweetheart. He knows the rules." She screwed up her face in concentration, and Marcus felt her reach out with abilities neither human nor Varan possessed, gently convincing the pet to exist in the present. It was disturbing and adorable in equal measure. Zareth joined them, moving with the grace that still made his breath catch. "The new families are arriving," she said, gesturing to the transport ships descending. 17 more human Varan couples, including Admiral Chen and T-Hek. "Chen and T-Hek," Marcus sputtered. "When did that happen?" "Apparently, planning our wedding was so traumatic it created a bond. They've been secretly dating for months. Our disaster of a marriage is inspiring others. Should we be proud or apologetic?" "Both," Zareth said, wrapping 2 arms around him while the other 2 caught Arya as she leaped impossibly high, her hybrid genetics giving her abilities that made physics cry. "Always both." As the sun set over New Harmony, painting the sky in colors that existed in multiple dimensions, Marcus reflected on how thoroughly his life had been derailed by one act of mercy on a battlefield. He'd started as a soldier trying to save a wounded enemy.